Thank you for returning to Jamyang, Venerable.
It's a pleasure.
It's our honor, and I want to welcome you all. My name is Fabienne. I'm the current director here. And just out of interest, who is meeting Venerable Robina for the first time?
Fabienne.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Wow. Yeah. Quite a few. So, Venerable Robina has quite a reputation, and which is why you're here. So, you've been ordained since the late 70s.
It doesn't matter, a long time, yeah.
And
I mean, it always sounds very silly. When you're old, it sounds rather silly. When you're young, to hear old people's ages, it just sounds ridiculous.
Well, what doesn't sound silly is that ever since she got ordained, she's basically dedicated her life to offering service to Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And then in all those years, I mean, it's a lot of virtuous activities, and it's important for us to know the extent of that experience and that service, because you've been managing editor of Wisdom Publication. You were editor of Mandala Magazine, founder and executive director of this amazing organization called Liberation Prison Project, which supports prisoners in offering them Dharma education around the world. And there's a documentary that was made about that. I know Venerable Robina will talk about it, but it is available outside. It's called Chasing Buddhas. And then for years, you've been traveling around the world teaching tirelessly. So just out of interest, how many countries are you
Fabienne, what's
this year?
this is?
No, just out of interest.
I have no idea, Fabienne. I don't know. A few. Come on.
Like dozens and dozens.
Come on, Fabienne. Relax.
So, and Venerable Robina is known for her direct, vigorous style.
That's polite for rude.
So, if you're listening, it will shake up your ego. So be prepared. If you need to take a break, take a break.
Oh, come on, Fabienne, you're getting ridiculous. Come on.
So enjoy.
Sit down. Behave yourself. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, yes. I always like to start with a little prayer, but I always like to say don't get all holy just because it's a prayer. Because in Buddhism, really, prayers are just, they're really just aspirations. May this and may that, you know. They're very optimistic, positive aspirations, sung to a nice tune, hopefully. And this, I'm going to sing in Tibetan, a little prayer. It's got two parts. The first two lines, for anybody in the room who already identifies with being a Buddhist, is like reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second two lines, that can be for all of us. Is the Tibetans would say, state what's your motivation for what you're doing? We might say, what's your purpose? What's your goal? So maybe we can say tonight, what are we here for? Maybe, you know, we're going to listen, me too, to these viewpoints about reality, happiness, suffering, and the mind, crucially, which is Buddha's expertise. And the reason we're going to listen, well, the ideal one, let's say, is they've got a nice analogy in Buddhism that a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So compassion is the point, which is to help others. But as the Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. And that's really the nuts and bolts of what we'll discuss tonight, which is the nuts and bolts of Buddhist view about reality, about the way the world is, about the mind, crucially. And because he's got this marvelous, his own observation is we've got this extraordinary potential to be less neurotic, less depressed, less fearful, more kind, more wise, more compassionate. That's the bottom line in Buddhism. So listen to it as advice for that. And if there's even 1% of what you hear is useful, that's fantastic, you know. So thinking this way. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupha shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu baru dagni kyab suchi Dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupha shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupha shog. Well, love or attachment, you know, this word attachment really sounds such a cute word, but for Buddhism it's got deep and vast meaning, you know. So as I said before, and sometimes it's initially a surprise to us, if you say the mind is Buddha's expertise, it is a surprise because when we think spiritual, you know, we think soul or spirit, absolutely, you know, I mean, this is clearly spiritual, all these holy pictures, and I'm a nun and I'm saying a prayer, sounds like spiritual, doesn't it? So it's surprising really, when you go into depth, especially when you study Buddhist psychology and philosophy in more depth, if you choose to, you know, it's kind of interesting that the clarity and precision and depth of analysis that we know you need to employ when it comes to science is exactly what you need to employ from the Buddhist perspective in order to unpack and unravel and become familiar with, so we can then reconfigure and radically change our mind. So those sound like nice words. What does it mean, you know? So the only way to really understand is that we have to know what Buddha means by the mind, because in many respects it's radically different from the view we have in our, well, we'd call it our philosophical materialist views, isn't it? We are we're philosophical materialists. That's the view that prevails in the world now. We might like God, we might like certain religious things, but basically that's the one that runs the show. So the view there was very clear, isn't it? Your mind is your brain, and which means it's physical. And as far as we're concerned, if you're not a Christian or a Muslim, you know, you don't believe in a creator, then you believe that your mother and father made you. You believe, and you track back your past to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, and back to the monkeys. That's the view we have. Fine. That's not the Buddha's view, that's all. He's got a very different view. As we well know, Christians have got a different view. It seems to be on the planet, I find this very important to think about, there's many humans over the centuries have done what the Tibetans so sweetly say, have done more than eat, sleep and go to the toilet, have bothered to look into the meaning of life, you know. So we can call that religion, philosophy, whatever you like. I mean, there's Mr. Lenin, you know. There are the Christians, there are the Muslims, and millions of views in Christianity. There are the Buddhists. But also look at the views that are more quiet. For example, Australians, you look at the original Australians, they were sitting there quietly minding their own business for 40,000 years until you POMs came along, you know. I mean, their view of reality, I can't even understand it, it's so complex. They call it their dream world, dream time. So we get a human, you're going to have viewpoints, isn't it? So it seems to me very reasonable, and I really think it's important. I give equal status to all of them out of respect. Doesn't mean I have to agree with them. Doesn't mean I have to believe or not believe, but there are lots of viewpoints on this planet. But I think we all tend to get very stuck in our own one, and I think if we look at us materialists, we have this incredible kind of hubris, this arrogance, that we really are the ones who've got reality. All these wacko religious people who think they're creators, and okay, we're respectful to the Aboriginals, but if we looked into their philosophy, we think it was kind of weird. And as for Buddhists, well, it's even weirder, you know. So whatever it is, but let's look at the Buddhist one. Let's look at the Buddhist view, because as I would put it, that's my working hypothesis. I never, even though it's called spiritual, whatever, you ask a Tibetan, are you religious? Well, of course they'll say. But for me, I never use the word belief purposely, because it causes us to be kind of intellectually lazy. And we have so many assumptions about something that's called religion or spiritual. The clear one is that you can't prove it and you're allowed to believe what you like, which means we all make up what we feel, you know, which is kind of rude. This is not the Buddhist approach at all. So I remember, well, I always quote this, we all ask the same questions, it seems to me, you know, about reality, about things, especially in Buddhist classes. But there's this one question only once, from actually a scientist in New Zealand, many years ago. He asked me, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? Well, I said, well, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? And of course, he laughed, everybody laughed, and said, what an absurd point. Well, of course not. So this is perfectly indicating the assumptions we have about what we call spiritual information and scientific information. So the fact is, the Buddha, from his perspective, his approach, this person called Buddha, is in line with what we call the scientific approach. There's no question about that. There's no question. He is not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. His whole view of the universe very clearly says we don't need creating. And if you have faith in a creator, I'm not trying to be rude, so please, you know, it's not like that. The Buddha was this regular guy who came out of this astonishing system in India. As the Dalai Lama says, I always quote this these days, as His Holiness said, it was these Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. Well, again, you know, we arrogant European Christian Jewish people think it was Freud probably 100 years ago. No, 3,000 years ago. And anybody who's bothering, and more people are these days, especially since these incredible conferences that the Dalai Lama's been involved with the last 30, 40 years, anyone who cares, looking into the past Indian views, including the Buddha, because he came along 500 years after that and then diverged in his own direction. He was educated in that incredibly sophisticated system, sophisticated philosophy, view of reality, view of the universe, view of the mind, but especially the mind one. And if you want to understand what I'm talking about here tonight, we don't need to have the whole big picture, and the whole big picture is fascinating, and we're going to be discussing that the weekend. But in order to understand certain points about the Buddhist view of the mind, which we're going to discuss, love and attachment, it's certain things we really got to get clear, So out of interest, and it doesn't really necessarily impact on our conversation tonight, the Buddha's view about the mind is as follows. One is, with absolute certainty as far as he's concerned, because he's not a creator, so if he didn't, in the finish of my conversation about Einstein, about Buddha, where did he get the information from, in the same way that Einstein observed the world as he could see it, with his conceptuality and his eyes and his ears and so on, he observed the world and he came up with certain findings and he verified those findings, he codified certain laws and he presented his findings. And he says, basically, here's what I found, here's my methodology, over to you if you're interested. So we know he did not ask us to believe what he said. We know he did not say he had a vision of it, he had a dream of it, or he made it up. We'd chuck him out the door on all counts, because that's what we understand about science. Well, that is the approach in Buddhism. That is exactly the approach. Buddha was this regular guy who came out of this astonishing system. He went as far as he could go in terms of his own findings, but in the Buddhist approach, which is the point about the mind here, it was totally internal. He investigates the mind. These Hindus, even before the Buddha, mapped the mind in the most sophisticated map of the mind, but we're not discussing the brain. You ask those guys back then where their brain was, they would not have had a clue. But they've developed this internal microscope of their mind. And this is where the view of the mind, as I'm saying, is so radically different. So we've all heard of mindfulness. Well, that really, and the variations of it that people, are teaching these days, which is marvelous, they have their source in this technique. It's known technically as Shamatha in Sanskrit, or as calm abiding, or as this really sophisticated psychological skill called single-pointed concentration, or the goal of which is to get this single-pointed concentration to the subtlety of which is not even anything remotely like in our culture, in our view of the mind. There's nothing like it, which of course is why we think it's spiritual. But the Buddha's discussing the mind is not physical, first point. Second, and this is coming from these Indians, when you cultivate this skill, single point of concentration, you access these more subtle levels of your mind, levels of subtlety that as I said, we do not even posit in the modern views of the mind at all, not even remotely. So the mind has far more subtle levels of capacity for cognition. Third, this is a shocking one for us. Your mind, which is a word that's used virtually synonymously with the word consciousness, and is referring to all your thoughts, intellect, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, this entire spectrum of our inner being. It is not physical. Brain, probably I like to put it this way, is the physical indicator of what's going on in your mind, a good physical indicator of what's going on in your mind, but only at the very gross level, the tip of the iceberg. Because Buddha's asserting these subtler levels. If you see a person in single point of concentration who's accomplished it, this amazing skill that's been around for 3,000 years, that is still extant, and people, looking like you and me, if some of us are white people, not just Asians, meditate, some white people like you and me up in the mountains, metaphorically or otherwise, accomplishing this skill. If you were to see a person who'd accomplished this, they would look like they were dead. So this is asserting, this is the point in the Buddhist view, that mind has these far more subtle levels that don't depend upon the physical, that are beyond conceptual and beyond sensory. And it's not meant to be some mystical thing. In order to accomplish the goal in Buddhism, the long-term goal, and I'll go into that, we need to access the mind at this more subtle level in the long term. So 99.9% of us won't. Nevertheless, there's masses we can get from this technique, concentration, meditation. So mind is not physical. It goes to far more subtle levels. This is the one that's surprising. If you're a materialist, your mummy and daddy made you. It's very clear. If you're a Christian or a Muslim, God made you. Neither for Buddha. Sure, mummy and daddy give you a body. That's pretty evident, but they don't give you your mind. This initially is a shock because we so utterly assume, we talk in the language of our modern the materialist view. So it's hard to hear this initially, but it's not necessarily contradiction. And this is why all these talks with the Dalai Lama and the best brains of the West had brought such marvelous fruit, like the finding of neuroplasticity now. These things from these conversations, it's fantastic. But it's very clear from the Buddha's view that your consciousness, and this is the unique point in the Buddha's view, and this is one of the key underpinnings actually, that is the basis of, that becomes the reason for your practice, that informs your practice if you're a Buddhist, which is that your mind is yours. Your mum gives you a brain, she gives you genes, she gives you DNA, all of these things. But she does not give you love, compassion, kindness, being good at football, being good at killing, whatever it is we have a tendency to be. The Buddha's view, and this is his own findings from his own observation, is that it's a continuity of mental moments that when you get back to the moment of conception, doesn't track itself back to a creator and doesn't track itself back to mummy and daddy. It tracks itself back to itself, basically. We mightn't go into this too much here, we'll see what happens. But these are the points. So like I said, Buddha's expertise really is the mind. Again, a surprise to us. And it's dealt with vastly and deeply in the literature, and it's all there for anyone who wants to study it, So why would you do this? Why is the mind important? Well, because as far as the Buddha is concerned, and this is the fundamental point that informs all of the Buddhist view, is that what goes on in our mind is the main source. What goes on in our mind is the main source of our happiness and suffering. That's it, pretty much. So the long-term goal in Buddhism, that's indicated by the word Buddha, Sangye in Tibetan, Buddha in Sanskrit, and the etymology is very telling, very tasty. This is the end result, so it implies the methodology of a Buddhist. And it's hard to hear this, it's so simple words, but because it's so utterly opposite to what we think, we can't hear it very well. So Bud, or Sang, implies the utter eradication from one's own mind, one's own being. Utter eradication of all fears, all nonsense, all ego, all sense of separateness, all neuroses, all anger, depression, anxiety, all the simple words, not the fancy, whatever we call these days, AD, ID, and HD, all those other business, not those. And I'm not being sarcastic. Well, I am, actually. Okay. I like the Buddha's view of the mind, old-fashioned words like love and compassion and attachment. So all the neurotic ones, and Buddha in his view of mental consciousness divides them into three categories. Neurotic, deluded, ridiculous, disturbing, distressing states of mind, which he has found from his own experience can be removed from the mind utterly and completely. That's implied by the first syllable, Bud. The second syllable implies the development to perfection of all the other stuff in the mind. Love, compassion, kindness, intelligence. So this is itself simple words, but this is shocking to hear because this is not the view we have. This is not the view of neuroscientists. It is not the view of our modern psychological models. It's very clear. So it's shocking to hear this. In fact, it's so shocking because we so take it as a given that a normal person has some love, some compassion, some jealousy, some depression, or whatever, that it's kind of, you'd be weird if you didn't have some lot of those. But that's the Buddhist approach. So it takes time to reconfigure this, to think about it, and then to even see the advantage of that, And so then we need to understand Buddha's analysis of these states of mind, because this is now getting us to love or attachment. So this model of the mind, the psychological model, 3 categories of states of mind, that's it, for everything that goes on in here, for the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of thoughts and feelings and emotions. 3 categories, no fourth. First is the neurotic, deluded, ridiculous, I-based, fear-based ones that are the source of my pain and the pain of all sentient beings, and this view applies to all the animals and all the creatures as well. It's a universal view of the mind, Buddha's approach. This stuff is the source of our pain, our misery, and the source of therefore why we make a mess of other people. Look at the world. But Buddha has found it's adventitious, as they say. It can be removed from the mind. So as that's the result, end result, clearly that implies the methodology. And then the other stuff is the good stuff, the stuff that we know when we hear it. If you meet a person who's angry, jealous, resentful, bitter, psychotic, you keep distant. Thank you very much, but no. Forget about being yourself. If you hear about a person who's generous, kind, loving, and intelligent, you don't go, oh, thank you, no. You go, oh, yes. We kind of know, these words are so simple. But we so utterly take them for granted. We so utterly, give them equal status as a normal part of a normal person, that initially this is a bizarre idea. I mean, I remember one person who heard this for the first time. It's really true, it's reasonable. She said, but you'd be mentally ill if you didn't have all those. And that's exactly what we think. So then it's interesting to question this, you know. So, if it is, and then the third category is interesting. I like to call the third category of states of mind the mechanics of our mind. So whether you're a murderer or a meditator or a whale or a budgerigar, you need concentration. You need good memory. You need, you know, capacity to distinguish between this and that. These are like the fundamental mechanics of our mind, and we're not discussing the brain here, that actually are developed hugely in single point of concentration. And they're the mechanics, if you like, they're the parts of our mind that we use to do the job in order to get the result of Buddha, to distinguish between the neurotic bits and the nice bits, speaking simply. And it's the hardest job we'll ever do. These words are not complicated technically, but the job is the hardest job we'll ever do because of our assumptions about these things. They're so utterly different. And because of our habituation with these neurotic ones, you know, and our kind of clinging desperately to the having of them, and indeed, certainly in our modern world, to our analysis of what their function is and my right to have them, somehow interestingly, you know. So, love and attachment. Attachment for the Buddha is under the first heading, the neurotic ones, and love is under the second heading, okay? So the qualities of the virtues, Buddha uses terms like virtuous and non-virtuous, and that makes us nervous in psychology, doesn't it? Even worse, he uses terms like negative and positive. That makes you even more nervous, because it sounds like you're criticizing someone. But we've got to hear them in a very clear way, you know, because Buddha's he's not a creator. He's not being moralistic. He's not saying we're bad. He simply has identified certain parts of the mind that causes enormous pain, that are the source of our pain, and that we can remove them. So the reason you want to remove them is because you want to be happy. Very simple. One way of framing all of Buddhism is in terms of it being a method for how to get happy and how to stop suffering. So he says he's found all beings want to be happy and don't want to suffer. And he says, guess what, folks? I've found some methods. You know, he's found some methods. Essentially, that's what he's saying. So he's found that these neurotic states of mind are the source of our pain. They've got two functions. One is and this is indicated by one of the terms used, disturbing emotion. It's completely clear. The last time you're anxious, depressed, angry, agitated, you know, upset even, just simply, jealous, resentful, detached. Of course it's disturbing, deeply disturbing. You can't control your berserk poor mind. Extremely disturbing. The other characteristic, and this is the key one to understand if we want to understand Buddhist psychology, is that they are themselves delusions. Or you could say the extent to which you're caught up in attachment, anger, and the others we're going to discuss, the extent to which you're caught up in these, and this is the crucial point to get, this when we understand tells us the approach in Buddhist psychology and tells us the way, what the job we need to do. The extent to which we're caught up in these disturbing emotions is the extent to which we are living in la-la land, and that's a literal statement. Buddha would have liked it. Living in la-la land. The extent to which we are delusional. Now you know yourself, if you're accused of being delusional, you'll be very offended. What the person is saying is you're not in touch with reality. Well, I cannot describe how that's such a perfect definition for the Buddha. Another way of framing all of Buddha's teachings in terms of getting in touch with reality and getting wisdom to see reality and to stop ignorance, which sees nonsense, which is the source of our suffering. So, okay, what is it then about these states of mind, particularly this one, love attachment? Okay, so in this big map of the mind, you know, they talk about the Buddhist describe 84,000 distinct neurotic states of mind. Luckily, they subsume to 3, and he calls them the 3 poisons. If you've read any Buddhist books at all, you'll be very familiar with that phrase, the 3 poisons. Well, you know, the 3 toxic emotions. Nice, tasty term, you know. So there's a very distinct hierarchical relationship between these 3. In fact, in this map of the mind, the Buddhist map, it's a really elaborate, interconnected map, not just a random set of disconnected states of mind. And the 3, they all subsume to the 3. These 3 on the face of it, simple words, but like all bodies of knowledge, words have definitions. And you won't learn a thing unless you know the definition of the words you're using, whether it's computer science or geometry or music. You've got to learn the definitions. Otherwise, because it's like a foreign language if you don't learn those definitions, isn't it? I mean, I just glanced at an advanced book of maths. I don't want even sure what it was. It might have been geometry. It might have been all those words. I don't even know what the difference are. I looked, it was just like this bizarre language. Bizarre, beyond bizarre, because you haven't learned it. So here, it's the crucial thing, the crucial thing in Buddhist psychology for us modern people, these words that he uses are extremely simple. We all know them, we're familiar with them. You know, if you haven't heard bipolar before, you've got to get a definition. Everyone knows the word love. Maybe everybody knows the word attachment. Everybody knows the word anger. But because of Buddha's different view of the mind, it's crucial if you want to understand Buddhism, and that's up to you, you've got to know what he is saying, what he is meaning by these words, not we mean by them. So what are they? And this is the point. If attachment is one that is under the negative heading, the neurotic heading, the deluded heading, the disturbing heading, and we can get rid of it, and love is under the positive heading, and we want to keep it and grow it, then we had better learn to distinguish. That's the whole point. And that's the essence of being a Buddhist. That's why you need concentration. That's why you need to learn this concentration technique. That's why you need to learn, if you're a serious Buddhist, the Buddhist in particular, the model of the mind, how these things work. And then the job day to day is to learn to distinguish between the rubbish ones and the good ones. And why is that hard? Well, because we're addicted to all of them, because we're addicted to the rubbish ones. We believe we're right to have them. We believe we'd be weird if we didn't have them. And we never pay attention to the mind anyway. And they're like a big soup right now. Not just a regular soup with kind of bits and pieces in the soup bumping into each other. Bit of love, bit of compassion, bit of anger, bit of jealousy. It's like a pureed soup. Almost impossible to distinguish, you know. So it's the hardest job we'll ever do, to distinguish what's going on in our mind. Which seems a bit surprising because we think we know our minds. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our teacher here, he says, this is very shocking. The vast majority of all human beings on this planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind, Tibetan's point here, for various reasons, they have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. So clearly the implication here, and this is the essence of the Buddhist approach and the Buddha's observation, is that we pay attention to the outside world. We are genius observers of the outside world. That's our science, all the things we have created. We're absolutely brilliant geniuses in understanding the outside world. And from the second we wake up in the morning until the second we go to sleep at night, where is our attention? The outside world. So here, at this level, we're describing what Buddha is saying is we all want happiness, we all don't want suffering. So the analysis we use, and Buddha calls it the samsaric analysis, you know, that's our philosophy right now. We're all in samsara, living according to these neurotic viewpoints that run the show. We've all got the good ones too, they're our saving grace. Is that the assumption of these viewpoints, and the assumption that Buddha is saying is completely mistaken, is that happiness and suffering is out there. And that's utterly goes without saying for all of us. Even when you describe your happiness, oh, tell me about what happened today. Are you happy, Robina? Yes, I'm so happy. Tell me about your happiness. And I'll give you a detailed description of the events that happened. And you'll say, well, no, that's about the events. What about your happiness? Well, I just told you. No, you didn't. Happiness is in the mind. But we don't even know there's a difference because we're so addicted to the external. What's wrong, Robina? Why, what's your suffering? Tell me about your suffering. And I'll give you a detailed description of the person who harmed me, or the bad weather, or the lousy food. So it's just, we are addicted to and involved, utterly consumed by, absorbed in the objects of our mind. So here, in Buddhism they say the mind is the subject and what it cognizes are the objects. And the crucial thing as a Buddhist is to become intimately familiar with the subject, with the mind, with the observer, the stuff in the mind, that if they're the deluded ones, completely blind us to the way reality is. That's one of their key functions. That's what it means by being delusional. And the virtuous ones are the ones that inform in a valid way, inform. So the way, also Lama Zopa says, the way the world appears back to us, this is why they say it in Buddhist psychology, the way the world out there appears back to us is through the lenses, or through the mirror, if you like. They use this analogy in Buddhism, through the mirror of our mind. And don't hear it as cosmic. So if your mind is overwhelmed by attachment, for example, you'll be intensely suffering. I'll describe in a second. If your mind is overwhelmed by anger, if your mind is overwhelmed by anxiety, if your mind is overwhelmed by love and compassion, the same things, the same people, the same events will appear profoundly different back to you. We know this, but we don't join the dots, you know. So one day you wake up just feeling fairly fine, and it's raining. You don't mind, you're quite relaxed, you're quite content. Another day you're angry, and or you're depressed, and you want to kill yourself because it's so horrible. But we know this, we utterly know this, but it's like we forget how the rain looked the day before, because we don't join the dots. And this is the implication of the way the mind works for the Buddha. These are the signposts, you know. So, what is it about attachment that makes it so horrible? As far as Buddha is concerned, it's the main source of our suffering in day-to-day life. I mean, that's ridiculous. First of all, because we don't have the same definition as the Buddha, and that's really important to know that what he's talking about is a really neurotic, I-based, self-centered, absurd, ridiculous, suffering state of mind. We use the word to conflate it almost with love or kindness. That's fine. We can have different definitions. But what we mean by, oh, she's really close to her family, she's attached to her family, that's good. That sounds good. But it's not what Buddha's talking about. And our trouble is, as Lama Zopa says, when we hear the Buddha says, sorry guys, you won't get happy until you give up attachment, we go, oh, I've got to give up my heart, I've got to give up my happiness, because we conflate it with love and kindness and attachment. That's not what he's saying. But when I tell you now that the qualities about attachment you'll all recognize, you'll see. So, there's first lot of states of mind that are adventitious that we can get rid of. Why should we? Because they cause us suffering, and because we're sick of suffering. The root one, these three, the root one, as they call it, the root neurosis, the root delusion, is known simply as ignorance. It's a very specific type of ignorance, and known colloquially as ego grasping. So its function is it's this primordial misconception deep in the bones of our being that has got the completely wrong view about the very nature of ourself. So that's where Buddha diverged from these amazing Hindus 2,500 years ago in relation to his own findings about the very nature of self, you know. He says the fundamental point about all these neuroses, all these delusions, they cause us not to be in touch with reality. Well, the root problem, the root delusion, the root neurosis is this ego grasping, this primordial clinging, frantic, fear-based, I-based, mistaken sense of our own self. I mean, these are pretty abstract things to us. We think that's the area for philosophers. Well, Buddha says we all have to understand this. If you want to get rid of suffering, you've got to do this job, you know. So on the basis of this primordial sense of a separate self, it's fear-based, not happy, fear-based, grasping. It gives rise to its main voice, if you like, which effectively is the main source of our suffering in day-to-day life, and that's called attachment. So it's multifaceted. It's primordially deep, and this is where, at least, you know, to indicate the Buddhist perspective of why it's so profoundly deep. We didn't get it from our parents. We don't get a mind from our parents. We get the genes, no problem, but it's not the way the Buddha talks. It's not the consciousness itself, the cognitive process itself. This comes from before. So even just here that we come into this life from the first second of conception, from the Buddhist perspective, programmed with all this stuff. And it's primordially deep, deeply instinctive. Deeply instinctive. Why? Because we've done it before. So we come programmed. We take it all for granted. So this attachment, the most primordial level of it, like at an energetic level, and we are all very familiar with it, is this primordial feeling of never being enough, never having enough, this deep, deep dissatisfaction. We've all got it to one degree or another. It's the deepest function of attachment. Some have it primordially deep, more deep, you know. It's constant sense that I'm never enough, never have enough. No matter what I get, not enough. No matter how much my boyfriend tells me he loves me, not enough. How much food, not enough. How many new things, not enough. It's a bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. Painful, aching, painful. And of course, we utterly believe it. So naturally that gives rise to the next level of attachment, which is this frantic hankering, like a junkiness for something, and always out there. Because the second you wake and you open up your eyes, there it is, the world out there. So something's got to be out there somewhere, such that when we glom onto it and have it and get it, it will, and ingest it, it will bring satisfaction. That's attachment. The next level of this attachment, the deep dissatisfaction, the emotional, there's this hankering, this hunger, emotional hunger for something. Then the belief that when I get it, it will make me happy, utterly and completely and spontaneously. And this is every second. And it's frantic to get the object, and because we're frantic to feel full, frantic to feel satisfied, believing the cake or the body or the this or the that will do it, you know. And this is just the gross level of attachment. The next and the key function of it right here is this attachment. The more hungry we are, the more dissatisfied, the more lonely, the more bereft, more separate, more hungry, the more this attachment will inflate the deliciousness of the object. Now we are utterly familiar with this every day, but we never join the dots. We don't see it coming, you know. So it's in that sense, it's genuinely delusional. When you even just attach to the old chocolate cake, when your stomach is empty and all the conditions are right and the eyes see that shape and colour and then attachment kicks in, we know it looks so divine, so delicious, and it's not possible to resist it, is it? I mean, we know this, it's just so evident. So this attachment then, when especially with people and things, then manifests after the hankering, the grasping, the over-exaggerating, manipulates and controls to get the object, exaggerating its deliciousness, and then holds on to it and possesses it as mine. This is all the spectrum of attachment. We recognize emotional hunger, we recognize dissatisfaction, we recognize hankering, we recognize exaggerating the deliciousness of something, we recognize possessiveness, we recognize control freak and manipulating and expectation. All of those words which we recognize are all a function of this thing called attachment. So then what happens when attachment doesn't get what it wants or gets what it doesn't want, and the point is that's 1,000 times a day, then to that degree, that's called aversion, the third of these three. The bare bones state of mind is called aversion. Now that too has a spectrum. The most volatile aspect of aversion is called anger. It's a volatile expression of aversion, which is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants or when it gets what it doesn't want. And we're running between these two 1,000 times a day, if not more. Often at just a mild level. But our trouble is we don't pay attention until it becomes violent. So anger is the volatile expression of aversion, the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Then there are mild aversions. We don't pay attention to these because these just seem so normal. Annoyed, irritated, frustrated, upset, even anxious, worried, stressed. All of they are thwarted attachment, expressing itself now as aversion, you know. And then, but internally, for some of you people, despair and depression. So the spectrum from violent externalized anger to deeply internalized depression. So this is like a rough analysis of the Buddha's view of this state of mind called attachment and this state of mind called aversion and their intimate relationship. And all the other 83,997 neurotic states of mind stem from these three: ego grasping, attachment, aversion. So these words are simple enough, but this analysis is absolutely not. This is not the analysis we use when we study Freud or Jung or whoever, you know. It's just not the way how we talk. This is the Buddhist analysis. So it's a very different approach, very different way of seeing. Now, if we're even prepared to consider the possibility that Buddha might be right, that attachment is a drag, and would like to get rid of it, and that love is good and would like to grow it. So what's love? Love's under the positive heading. It's a valid state of mind insofar as it's not delusional. That's the meaning. So the key characteristic of attachment and the other neuroses is when they're very powerfully in there, the mind is agitated, distressed, and crucially, the mind is we feel very separate from others. Very separate. They cut us off. It's very self-absorbed, utterly self-absorbed. Don't get guilty, it's just how we are. And it's deeply painful, and it's causing the things out there to appear in a distorted way. So when you've got attachment is your rose-coloured specks. Your aversion is your ugly cracked specks. And we're going between these all the time, from pillar to post. So love is a valid state of mind that bare bones definition is it's a thought, a concept. I'm going to get into this concept, the idea of a concept, is that it's the thought, may you be happy, as a delight. So that I might say, I have to have a boyfriend. I always need a boyfriend. Hang on. Can't see anybody. Yeah, you again. What's your name again?
Heyman.
Who?
Heyman.
Heyman. I thought it was different last time, wasn't it? No. Heyman. How do you spell it?
H-E-M-A-N-T. Heyman.
Heyman. Okay, Heyman. Okay, where's that from?
Indian.
Where's it from?
Indian.
India. Oh, that's right. Okay, Indian. Okay, he's my boyfriend. I'm sorry, he's going to be abused now. So I will say I love Heyman, you know. And we know that word. Well, mostly we mean when especially at the beginning, that's 99% attachment. Because we know when you're in love with somebody, he looks, this is really, it's like a joke, but it's not a joke. We know it so well. He looks totally divine. We really know this. It's astonishing that a person should look so divine, so heavenly, and you can't stop thinking about him day and night. You can't stop looking at him. You can't stop touching him, and all the rest. This is a function of attachment. But the trouble is, when we hear the Buddha says there's a problem, we get very distressed. Somebody wants a seat. Please take care. Oh, okay. So this is where it's like a minefield to distinguish, not chuck the baby out with the bathwater. There's nothing wrong with feeling good. There's nothing wrong with happy feelings. They're marvellous. We're not trying to get rid of those. But we've got to learn to distinguish what this attachment is doing, how it's misleading us, lying to us, and causing us suffering. And that's not an easy job. It's quite an intricate job internally to do, you know. You can't do it by looking at your brain. It won't help. So then the love part, that's there too. That's my saving grace. I do want him to be happy. That is a marvellous state of mind. So the virtuous states of mind are connected to others. The neurotic ones are separate from others and are hungry and sort of, you know, extreme and separate, dualistic as they'd say. But the virtues are marvellous states of mind. So the love part is the delight that he be happy. But when there's attachment there, it's easy. Because attachment is this, now to be brutal about attachment, to summarise what it is, it's like this vampire in us that is violently hungry and frantic to only get the nice things. It's desperate to only get the nice things, which is why we have a panic attack when we don't. That's called aversion, anger, upset, annoyed, irritated, despair, depression, which builds up. Attachment is a frantic junkie that can only bear the nice things. Another even more brutal way of talking about attachment is that it's the junkie in us that only wants what I want. It's necessarily self-centered. It's necessarily separate from others. It's necessarily kind of set in stone and rigid and kind of concrete, you know. It's a really frantic state of mind. But whoever sees it like that? We don't. We recognize the symptoms of it, we see it, but we don't define it this way, we don't analyze it this way, we don't recognize it as a problem even though it's staring us in our face that it's a problem, but we don't think of it this way because we think it's normal. Normal meaning you'd be abnormal if you didn't have it. So there's no attempt to not have it, no attempt to observe it, analyze it, and slowly diminish it and change it, you know, not like that. So love and attachment, it's like we'd say, you know, us English and Australians would say it's like chalk and cheese. They're utterly, profoundly different states of mind. But like I said, they're like mixed together like a big soup. And you could say that we're so, this attachment, it's a junkie, it's addiction really, is so intense that it's impossible when you're fully in the midst of it, I mean, you know, for Heyman, that it's almost impossible to distinguish the attachment from the love. And this is why this job of distinguishing between the rubbish stuff and the good stuff sounds easy. It is the hardest job we'll ever do because this stuff is so familiar, we're so familiar with it, and it's so ancient in us and so primordially deep that it's an extremely hard job to begin to distinguish. So you have to use signposts of when we're going to start, to notice what's going on so that we recognize, that's attachment and not love. We have to see the difference. So if it's mainly love I have for him, I'll be kind, spacious, connected, patient, forgiving, compassionate. If it's mainly attachment, I'll be a maniac, you know, and it won't last long. Because naturally he's a human being. In the beginning, when you don't live together, you just see perfection. You just see this divine person. You get a bit close, you hear him, you know, chew his food the wrong way, fart in the sheets instead of the toilet, leave the toilet seat up, not behave perfectly. So attachment is freaking out, not getting what it wants many times a day. So aversion arises, and before you know it, you wake up one morning, who's this ugly bloke in my bed? Get out of here, you know. And now what's running the show? Now what glasses do I have on? Ugly, angry glasses. He now looks horrible to me. And he's only a month later. So I mean, we ought to look at this. It's so obviously logical. He's got no more grey hairs than a month ago. He's got no fatter than a month ago. He's got no extra wrinkles than a month ago. But look how he looked then. And this should blow our minds, but why doesn't it? We should ask. I mean, are we stupid? Yes, Buddha says. I mean, he looks divine 1 year, 1 month, 1 month later, he looks so revolting you can't even think his name. I mean, this is a classic example of exactly how we're not recognizing what's going on in our mind. And each story, we believe it. I believed that month ago that he was divine, now I believe he's a monster. But nothing's changed. I mean, we've discovered certain things he might have done, which have informed us, but basically he doesn't look any different. If you saw him, if you didn't know this bloke and you saw him a month ago and you saw him today, you wouldn't see one day a handsome guy and then one day an ugly guy. You wouldn't, because you're not overwhelmed by attachment or aversion. But so the point is, it's sort of evident, we know this. Well, the chocolate cake is even more simple. It doesn't take a month for the cake to look ugly. It's like takes 3 pieces. It's so clear. But why don't we join the dots? It's so fascinating. It should blow our minds. Oh, the problem isn't the cake, the problem is my mind. Because that's all Buddha's saying. The cake's fine, he's fine. Okay, might be a maniac. But the mind is the point. I keep putting my new glasses on. Attachment glasses one day, jealousy the next, loving the next. I mean, we're all over the place. It's the mind that's informing how things appear to us. It's so clear. I mean, to the Buddha. But it takes time to do it. So what was the advantage of doing this? Well, the advantage of looking into my mind, observing the difference between attachment and love, is so that I can get less neurotic, I can get more stable, I can become more fulfilled and more happy and more joyful, not to mention be useful to him and kind to him, you know. So this is the fundamental basis of Buddhist practice, distinguishing between just these examples, you know. But it's not easy to see because attachment, all the voices of ego, is a way of putting it, I like to say that, they're all deeply instinctive and they're all kind of wicked. They're all sort of manipulative and tricky and sneaky and lie. I mean, it sounds so peculiar to talk this way, like childish almost. But it's when we live in these, you know, we know people who are really duplicitous. We know people who lie. We know people who don't admit what their problems are. This is all the function of all these things. Because they're all rooted in what Buddha calls ego. And the irony of ego in Buddhism isn't some makes you a big, strong, handsome person. The irony of ego is it's like this nightmarish, wrong sense of a separate, miserable me. Or as Lama Yeshe calls ego, the self-pity me, which sounds cruel, you know. When we're caught up in these voices of ego, we are living in hell. And their names are pretty simple. Attachment, which gives rise to anger, which gives rise to jealousy, which gives rise to all the other lot. These are the nightmares. So what are the difficulties, what are the obstacles in our doing this job, or even wanting to do this job of knowing our mind? Well, the first one is the analysis of our world, but not just that, it's instinctive. When I was a little girl, anger is I used to think anger was my middle name. My response to when my attachment didn't get what it wanted was to shout and yell and scream. So I didn't need to be taught that. My mother did not have to show me. I had it down, you know. And the thing is, you tell me as much as you like that my sister did this and this and this and therefore this and therefore that. To explain it, I couldn't have heard it. Not possible. I totally bought into 1,000,000% this habit of having a panic attack when my attachment didn't get what it wanted. And we see it everywhere all the time. Other people, children, grown-ups, whatever, we see it. We see it so naked, it's so clear. But we have to have this analysis to see it, you know. So one obstacle is because it's so habitual. The one thing preventing us. But even more fundamental than that, the thing that prevents us even wanting to do this job is because I really do believe it is his fault. Even when I'm happy. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, he's so kind to me. You blame him for even your happiness. I mean, it's a good way of putting it. And this is true, the Buddha's view is, we believe happiness and suffering are out there. It's hard to hear this because it sounds punitive and moralistic, but it's not meant to be this way. I mean, Buddha says we're living in La La Land, that's why we suffer. We suffer because we're not in touch with reality. He's got subtler levels of reality for sure, but this is the key way he would say it, across the board. The extent to which you suffer is the extent to which you're caught up in attachment, anger, and all the other dramas. That's it. It's very shocking, though, when you have extreme examples, like working with people in prison, where you see nightmarish environments, especially in America, which I'm familiar with. It's like hell on earth, that system, you know. I always quote, they have 5% of the world population. They have 25% of the prison population on this planet. Per head of population, more than 10 to 20 times per head of population, more than any other country on the planet. A quarter of all humans on the planet who live in prisons, live in American prisons, you know. I can't describe the nightmarish environment. So for me, working with people in these environments, has been a very powerful experience, very humbling experience, because they just, the ones who like Buddhism, they take to it like a duck to water, because they don't have the luxury of choice. Buddha's got this marvellous saying, which is really the essence of the approach in Buddhism, that if you know, I forget who said it, but it's a very classic Buddhist thing. If you can change something, I mean, please change it. If I ask him to be nice and put the toilet seat down and stop being mean to me, and he does, well, I've succeeded. But what if he doesn't? What if you can't change the outside? And that's the starting point of our misery and our nightmare, and that's the starting point of practice. It's very clear. It's fine to, you know, if you get the wrong chocolate, you get the wrong cake, it's fine to ask for the right one. But what if you can't get it? What if he's not going to behave nicely? What if the politicians won't do what we like? What if the boss will not unfire you? What if your ex-husband won't give you up anymore? I mean, and this is the point. This is where the nightmare happens, that second when attachment doesn't get what it wants. That second when aversion and panic and fear and drama and stress and anxiety, whatever names you like, arises. That's the point where the suffering begins, and that's the point where the opportunity for practice begins. And it's intensely difficult. So we've got to have some even intellectual conviction. Not hear it as a moralistic thing, which is how we hear this stuff, you know. Someone's trying to kind of squash us from above and tell us don't do this and don't do that. That's not the Buddha's view at all. He says we ought to look into this stuff and see that this is breaking our hearts. It ought to be with compassion for ourselves, that we would want to look into our minds and even begin to work on them. So the first reason it's difficult is because it just instinctively appears to be that it is his problem. Happiness does appear to be in the cake, so of course I'm going to cling to it, because the habit is so deep. Then the next problem is because, and this informs this, the second we wake up until we're time to go to sleep, all our attention's on the outside. And then we have this brilliant analysis of the outside. We call it, you know, all our science and our art and our creativity and our world. We're such geniuses, you know, about the outside world. We know, and then the other one, the analysis of why am I angry? Why am I depressed? Why am I anxious? Why am I jealous? This is the major difference in the analysis, and this takes time to hear. So of course I believe I'm angry. Yes, I know I'm angry. Clear. Why are you angry, Robina? There's one cause as far as I'm concerned, as him. That's it. It's very clear. We immediately point to the outside. Now, Buddha's not arguing with that. He's not saying he didn't punch me. You saw him. He punched me. Fact. And look at the world. Look at the suffering in the world. I mean, I think of my friends in prison and the nightmarish environment of all these falsely accused people. I mean, it's just so corrupt there, you know. People on death row for 30 years, people in prison for 30 years, and they didn't do the thing. I mean, this is the nightmare living hell, you know. This is a fact. Look what happened. Outrageous. But the Buddha's point is this, and it's not punitive, it's not moralistic, it's not blaming you. It's not saying he's off the hook. All he's saying is, you know what, if you can change it, great. But what if you can't? And what you can change is your mind. So what that means, and this is the hard part, once we start to get some concentration, once we start to look into these states of mind, especially these emotional ones, which is what we give enormous power to, and for us, emotions are set in stone, are so concrete and so real. But for the Buddha's analysis, they're the tip of the iceberg. They're the tip of the iceberg. And they're when the body is involved. We're addicted to our bodies, you know. We define ourselves by our bodies. All our happiness and suffering is defined in terms of bodily experiences. We are addicted to our bodies. And we only therefore notice attachment and anger and when the body is involved. And that's way too late. That's Vesuvius exploding. That's you going along at 100 miles an hour on the motorway and you discover your wheels are falling off. That's the major reason we have such difficulties mentally, is because we leave the problem until it's way too late. From the Buddhist perspective, this has been, you know, that anger's been building up and building up, that depression, that whatever it is, has been building internally. But it's like the wheels wobbling. We just haven't paid attention. And it's only when you want to murder somebody or yourself, then we discover we've got a problem. And that's even the level to which we then go to therapy. You know, if I'm blissfully happy with him and we're in love and someone says, go meditate, Robina, you think, what? I'm perfectly happy, why should I? Which shows our view of meditation. It's an alternative to a pill. It's to make all the pain go away. It's like that's going to the mechanic when you've got the wheels falling off. It's too late. You should have gone when they wobbled. So the Buddhist approach is, without forgetting about the big picture karma and all this business, which is a major part of being a Buddhist, informs your practice. If we can begin to pay some attention, beginning humbly, use the techniques to help us get some focus so we can begin in the daily life to pay attention and to see what the hell is going on in here, not just what's going on out there, and to own what is in here and stop this other one that we have so strongly. I am jealous, it's true, I am angry, but I'm allowed to be jealous. Look what he did, we'll say. Buddha, he says, you're right, he did punch you, I agree with you, Robina, but haven't you noticed that you're suffering? And this is the schizophrenic way we are, excuse me, I'm not joking. Lama Yeshe would often say that. We're so disconnected from ourselves. We know I'm living in hell with this jealousy, but I believe that it's his actions that caused the jealousy. This is hard to see that it's not true. He did, but the Buddha's way of putting it is his behavior was a trigger, it was a catalyst for the jealousy, and the jealousy is the problem. But we hear that and we go, but I'm allowed to be jealous. Look what he did. And that's where we hear it as moralistic. It's very hard to hear this. It sounds like you're blaming me. It's not. And the Buddha says, so this is where we think the source of jealousy, if we have a materialist view, not being rude, then naturally the jealousy comes from my genes, my DNA, and it comes from my behavior from the past. So I go to the therapist, distressed and despairing about his damn behavior. She hears me just talk about the jealousy. So what do we do together? We look back into the past to look for a needle in a haystack. What happened to cause Robina to get jealous? That's how we analyze, right? Automatically. Now, Buddha doesn't disagree with that analysis. It can be very helpful to look at the external world. But he says you're not getting to the point. You're not hitting the nail on the head. And this is a simple point that Buddha's making. We think jealousy comes from mummy, daddy, genes, DNA, and the boyfriend, and I'm this innocent victim who got done with jealousy. He kind of injected it into me. So therefore I'm allowed to have it. Look at what he did. But the Buddha says, what's the jealousy? Jealousy is a habit in my mind. And what's the source of that jealousy? The moment before. And what's the source of the jealousy yesterday? In other words, why are you jealous? Why am I jealous, Buddha? Well, honey, you must have been jealous before. Yeah, I know that. Why am I jealous yesterday? I'm sorry because you were jealous the day before. Yeah, I know that, but why was I jealous the day before? Because you were jealous the day before. It's almost such a simple answer, we can't hear it. It's a habit. Jealousy is a habit. Love is a habit. Kindness is a habit. Playing music is a habit. Kicking football is a habit. Being tortured is a habit, whatever your habit is. And we come programmed with this stuff. So we have to become familiar with our habits. And then see the ones that are healthy and useful. If they're not, begin to change them. I mean, the rest of the analysis is fine, but it doesn't help you solve a problem. Leave him with absolute certainty. Get the hell out of his way. He's a maniac. But that's the terrible irony. When you're overwhelmed by the victim mind, overwhelmed by the pain and the rage and the hurt and the despair and the jealousy and the righteousness of this, you are paralyzed. You can't do anything. And for me, this extreme example I always tell about people in prison, for me, is really, explains the point. This is one woman. I always quote this woman. I always forget her name too. Never mind. This is years ago in the 70s, this white hippie with a white husband and hippie kids hitching in Florida. And I read a bit of her memoir. And they got picked up by two guys and the police stopped the guys and the guys killed the police and blamed the hippies. So they're on death row in Florida. Well, the story is it took her 17 years to get out eventually. The husband got executed. She lost her children. Her family got, killed in a car accident, so the kids got into the system. You can't conceive of the nightmare of unfairness in the simple level, these outrageous things happening. And our normal response to that would be to lose your mind, to be full of rage and despair and anger, and in the sense that we've all got this, understandably. But she said at some point, I realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. Now, she wasn't a Buddhist, I don't think. I think she did yoga and stuff. They couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. I mean, this is so dramatic, and we love to read things like this. We love stories like this. But hear the teaching. This amazing woman, all I can say is she must have had an incredibly powerful mind, incredible intelligence, incredible emotional intelligence, that she could keep her sanity enough to see that she could not lift a finger anymore to change any of this nightmarish situation. But she didn't lose her mind. She kept it, and this is the essence of the Buddhist approach. What she did was, She reinterpreted, and this is the essence of what it means in Buddhism to change your mind. She reinterpreted her scenario. She saw it as good. This is like demented. But who was the beneficiary? She was. In other words, she retained her sanity. She retained her sanity, which means she gave up attachment, which is a junkie that only wants what I want. She gave up anger. She must have had that much. She recognized, and this is why it's a practical issue. This is not moralistic, it is not punitive, it is not blaming, it is not judging, it's practical. All Buddha has found, all he's saying is, our mind is an infinitely flexible thing. And this is where we have to get into, once we recognize the emotional component of our mind, the anger, the rage, the hurt, the despair, the attachment, which is the emotional component, which is raging uncontrolled. Those emotions are the tip of the iceberg, and when we become familiar with our mind at a deeper level, we start to listen to these conceptual stories that are raging on like a river underneath everything. When we start to get in touch with those, that's at a conceptual level. They're conceptual stories, and you can change, you can rewrite the script. Buddha is a cognitive therapist, and I'm not joking, but when emotions are raging, when the wheels are falling off at 100 miles an hour, you can't do much but damage control. So that's why to pay attention sooner to these things deep in our bones before they arise as emotions. They're the tip of the iceberg of what's going on deep down. So if we were to write down, isn't it, all these emotions, you'd have an elaborate conceptual story of attachment describing things, of jealous story, of angry story, loving story, kind story, intelligent story. They're all thoughts. This is the essence in the Buddhist approach, that all these emotions come down to being thoughts at a subtle level. At a much subtle level, and we have to get in touch with them at that level. And it's at that level we can change the story. She rewrote the script, basically. And why should she? Because she had no choice. Now, at the same time, I always quote this, I read about this other fellow, also death row, also innocent, and also what we'd call normal. He went out of his brain. Raging daily, with despair, lost the plot completely. And we call that normal. And we actually think he has no choice. And we think it's right. Look, of course he's angry. Well, look what they did to him, we'll say. And he's out of his brain with despair. I did not rape and kill that woman, he would shout daily. Now the point is, this is so shocking to us. It's so hard to get past the punitive part, the blaming part. None of that is implied by this. It's a practical issue. If you'd said to him in the midst of that rage and despair, sweetheart, you could learn to change your mind, he'd think you're mad. You'd be accused of abuse. How dare you, so unsympathetic, But this woman had the ability, and that's what we have to learn to do. That's the essential Buddhist point. So please change it if you can. But when you can't, this is when practice begins, And who's the beneficiary? You. It's the hardest job we'll ever do, because we're habituated with the other job, So I think you have to ask me some questions now. Yeah. I haven't got a clock. I don't know what time it is. Oh, clock down there, is it? Let's have a look. So anybody got questions about this whole approach? 8:10. Okay, good. Ask me some questions now. Yes.
I suppose I'm just thinking, when you talk about attachment, and we have that word in psychology.
Do we? What does it mean?
For babies, attachment.
Oh, you're close to people, like a good. We use it in a good way, don't we? That word, yes, exactly.
That a baby is attached.
Yes, that's right,
to
exactly. Perfect.
And that attachment is rooted in survival. That the baby.
Well, that's the analysis, but but that's not the attachment Buddha's talking about.
Okay, so that's what I was just wanting to check.
Oh, very
where
clear.
There is an attachment, that need for things to survive.
Oh, okay, no, that wouldn't be the Buddhist. No, okay, there's a different analysis, but it doesn't necessarily contradict that one. Everyone's got different analysis of these things. That one mightn't be the way Buddha would say it. But go on. There's a question in that. Yeah.
When it comes to survival, and we're attached to things, surely that's necessary.
See, but you're using the word as if it's the word the Buddha's referring to. We're discussing a different thing here. Did you recognize what I said before? Needy, emotionally bereft, emotionally hungry, neurotic, manipulating, controlling, expecting, exaggerating. Did you hear those words? Are you describing that?
No, but I just...
No, stop. Are you describing what I just said?
No.
Okay, we're discussing a different thing. It happens to be the same word, doesn't it? Can you see the point?
Do you think that emotional attachment like manipulation, psychology would say that comes
You mean
from
Western psychology, modern psychology? Because I'm talking psychology as well.
That the child did not have a good attachment, that attachment as a child was rooted in a sense of survival. And
I have to unpack with you. I can't quite understand your point. Forgive me, and I want to actually. So, okay, I don't quite get what you're saying.
Well, that people's neurosis...
Huh?
People's neurosis and that neurotic thinking comes from early childhood not getting
Not
what they
Buddhist,
needed.
no, you get born with it. This way is a different analysis completely. What you're saying is not contradicted necessarily by the Buddha's approach. In other words, the way you're treated plays a major role in your life. It's very clear. How could he argue with that? But the crucial piece is this. What's assumed in that view is that you got those things from your mother, and then the behavior of your mother determines the way you become. The Buddha says you didn't get that stuff from your mother. You could be born with a very deeply disturbed mind, or you can be born with a very blissful, compassionate mind. You have to see different. Would you recognize that some children behave differently as very little children? The Buddha's approach is we come programmed with our own stuff from before. That's just to give you the answer, the simple point here. So some children come into this world, you know, blissfully kind and loving. Some come in crazy and angry. The Buddha's factoring in that there is something in the child's mind already, and then depending on the treatment from the parent, that activates that. So I came into this world, from Buddhist perspective, with a tendency, let's say, to be angry. The Western analysis is I must be angry because my father beat me, or I'm angry because my mother did this or that. No, I'm angry because I've been angry before. I came into this world with anger, or love, or kindness, or in my case, being good at music. My mother was a musician. So I came into this world with a tendency to be good at music. And then my mother, being good at music, nourished that by teaching me. So my father hitting me nourished my anger, but the anger has to be there in the first place. That's the extra piece that's crucial in this definition, in this analysis here. So yes, behavior makes a massive difference. Of course it does, there's no question, but it's not the total thing. In other words, you know you're going to find in modern psychology, you will find examples of people who've been brutalized by their parents, but they turn into very marvelous human beings. And some have had a little bit of brutalizing and turn into completely maniacs. So we can't kind of work that out in our culture. We're just sort of a bit mysterious, isn't it? The Buddha factors in that something in the mind already from the person from before. That's the extra factor. Can you see what I'm saying? Yeah. Yes. Just here. Okay, back there. Go. Fine. Go, Cam. Yes.
Thanks for your lovely talk.
Uh-huh.
My question is about the attachment state of mind in relationships.
But can you get a bit closer to the mic? Perhaps I can't quite hear you.
Sure, is that better?
That's better, much better.
Okay. So it seems to me that a lot of us get into relationships in the attachment state of mind.
Yeah.
And just as there's a loving state of mind, whereby we approach things with non-attachment and we see things as they are, and we want what's best for them regardless of ourselves, the attachment state of mind is almost its opposite in that where we want it for what it can give us, what it can do to change our state of mind.
Okay, so then, yeah. Then.
So when we get into relationships in an attachment state of mind, firstly, is it possible to transform it if both people have gone in attached? How can you transform it into a more loving one? And secondly, is it possible, and have you seen many examples of, people approaching relationships in that loving state of mind? Is it possible for relationships to start in that loving space of mind, or do all relationships go through a period of attachment?
No, it's all a question of the
necessarily?
person. I mean, if we take this view that we come into this life with our own, keep the mic, if we take this view that we come in with our own, we've all got, okay, even forget whether you come in with it, we're all different kinds of people. Some people are more needy and less needy, have you noticed? Some get more angry, less angry, some get more depressed, I mean, we all can see we're all variations of the same recipe, some a lot more, some a lot less, some more kind, more patient, some more impatient. Surely you can see that. Well, already there's your answer. So depending on you, what you're bringing into it. So if you're huge, using the Buddhist words, got enormous dissatisfaction in yourself, think you're a creep, think you're nothing, unless you get a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever you have these days. I mean, we're very flexible now. I mean, you understand. So, you know, and if you're just constantly thinking all the time that you're nothing and nobody, I mean, this is an extreme example of being lonely and isn't it, right? And you're constantly yearning for someone out there, convinced that when you get a person, that'll fulfill you, that'll make you happy. And I'm saying it in a very gross way. That's an extremely needy, and that's called attachment. Some other people are very independent and really love to have boyfriends and girlfriends, but don't rely upon it. So we can see that. But this attachment is this deep sense of dissatisfaction, an assumption that on my own I'm nobody. That really is what attachment is, which is why we do feel lonely. I mean, analyze what loneliness is. Loneliness is, I've got all these thoughts and no one to hear them. So we ought to ask ourselves the question, what is it about my thoughts that make them so boring until someone else hears them? And if they're so boring on their own, why do I want someone to hear them? But we have this assumption that I'm nobody. That's the pain of attachment. I'm this separate, lonely, bereft nobody. And this is the deepest attachment, actually, the subtlest one, way more than sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This deepest attachment, this deepest neurosis, I'm describing it, not the attachment she's talking about, is this deep assumption that I'm nobody unless other people see me and hear me and touch me and taste me and praise me. I mean, as crude as that sounds, the deepest attachment we have is this frantic yearning to be seen in a good light. I mean, it's so primordial in us.
And what exposes that fundamental, most subtle attachment? What can it bring it to light and make it the illusion? What can expose that? What can expose
your misery
that
every day.
So
your own raging thoughts. If you wrote down on a book your unhappy thoughts, you'd be vomit at the thought of this poor unhappy person. You just hear your own thoughts. But it's the hardest job in the world to do that. Because we believe they're true. When you're depressed and lonely, and I'm not being sarcastic here, someone says, Robina, you're so fortunate, you've got so many good things in your life, and we can't hear it. Or someone praises me 27 times, I don't believe it. And then one person criticizes me, I go like a magnet, and I believe it 1 billion%. I mean, this is evidence of our pain. It's evidence of our own view of ourselves. So the irony of ego in Buddhism is we're disconnected. These delusions disconnect us, make us fraught, unhappy, empty, dissatisfied, nothing, nobody. While we constantly, whether it's craving sex, drugs, rock and roll, or people, it's the same kind of philosophy,
Thank you.
As you lessen, the Buddhist approach is as you lessen this fraught, unhappy, dissatisfied, needy, I'm nothing, you literally lessen that. You become more joyful. You become more fulfilled in yourself. You don't have to get a cake or a person to fulfill you. You become more joyful. You become more content, more fulfilled. And then the relationships you have are marvelous. And you get far more joy as well.
Thanks.
Do you understand?
Yes.
Good, I'm happy. Someone here and someone there. Two here.
Hi. So what are the practices to give up attachment?
Well, it's like I'm trying to describe to you what it's like to play tennis. I mean, you've got to go find a coach and learn it, That's your job. I mean, I'm trying to get you excited to think maybe playing tennis might be a good idea.
No, it is an awesome idea. So how do you do that?
You just repeat, I'm going to repeat my answer to you.
Yeah.
You're not hearing me. That's your job, to go find out and get a coach and teach you. You're not hearing me, are you?
No, I am, but...
You'd like me to tell you now?
I would like you to be my coach.
What?
I would like you to be my coach.
Well, not tonight. Do you think when you describe, I mean, if you know we're describing tennis, there's a system there to teach you. And if we're describing how to play music, if we're describing music here, there's a system there. So I'm telling you the Buddhist approach, we have to assume there's a system there. There's a system there. So the first point here really is to go, well, that's interesting, I'd like to look into that. So then to try and a little bit, the first step is you have to want to look into your mind. You have to want to even take on board the possibility that Buddha's right in saying that your mind plays a role. Forget about that it plays the main role, but even it does play a role at all. If you even like that idea, then that's the first step. And then to know that it's possible that you could do this. Then the very next one, I mean really, the next step would be, this is the summary of it, you need to learn the skills, like called concentration meditation, that gives you the ability to focus your mind so that, even if you do it 5 minutes a day, when you open your eyes from that focusing your mind, you then bring to bear that skill that then gradually enables you to not just be obsessively paying attention to what the boyfriend is doing and what the traffic is doing, which is normal, and then not noticing what's in here until you're crying. But you learn the skill to begin to pay attention to what's happening in here before the wheels fall off. That's the simple answer. And that skill grows and grows and grows. That's the essence of it. So third, to be thorough in it, because we're using the very distinct Buddhist approach to the mind, you'd also need to learn the theory of this approach to the mind, so you know what the hell you're looking for in here. That's the answer. And then you become like Federer. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's the point. That's the approach. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. I always struggle with the concept. I understand attachment.
Oh, you do? Very good.
Well, no, I just...
Okay. Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. We'll never begin to understand it until we go deep inside. And this is very true. But go on.
I completely agree. Maybe that's why hence my question is going to come across as being very confused.
Go on. What are you confused about?
Is having an expectation from your partner in a relationship, is that attachment?
Okay, I understand your point. This is the part that's really difficult. Because when we hear that attachment has a massive function of expectation, then we think I've got to stop expecting, but then we throw the baby out with the bathwater. So you expect him not to punch you every day, and you expect him to come at 6 o'clock when you agree at 6 o'clock. So the point is, put it this way, there's attachment to walk out the door. I've decided to walk out the door, okay? There's attachment to walking out the door, and there's the mere decision to walk out the door. They're separate things, but we can't tell the difference. So if I'm attached to walking out the door, which means I've got a vested interest in walking out the door, you'd better not stop me on the way, baby. Excuse me, I'm trying to get out the door, out of my way. That would indicate that there's attachment mostly. Now, if I'm not attached to walking out the door, I will deal with what arises on the way, which is you wanting to have a chat with me, so I'd stop and have a chat. But I'm still going to focus on getting out the door. So it's reasonable, if you're going to have a relationship with somebody, you have contracts, that you don't beat me up and you don't cheat on me, and you do. All these things, it's good to have a contract, it's good to have an agreement with each other, it's reasonable. So then if a person continues to not fulfill your agreement, then this is the point. What happens is with attachment, you stay on for 27 years and he keeps hitting you in the nose and you keep saying, oh, well, he really does love me. Or your attachment wants to manipulate him, to force him to be what your attachment wants, in spite of the evidence he's not changing. And that's where the nightmares come. So you're not being realistic. It's reasonable to expect him to behave nicely. It's reasonable you all agree with each other. That's completely normal life. That's how that's how we survive in our lives. You go to work, you're expected to work. You drive on the traffic, you're expected to stay in the right lane. That's good. We need all these agreements. But the thing is, what happens when it doesn't happen? That's when you've got to make some choices. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's the part that's difficult. Because if you get strongly attachment, which is kind of neurotic and demanding and needy and it manipulates, attachment, look at our mums when they're attached to us. There's nothing more painful than our mummy manipulating and controlling and expecting us to be a certain way. We know it's suffocating. That's attachment. Possessiveness and demanding and manipulating. We know it's so painful. It doesn't help, it just drives the person away. So it's reasonable to have an agreement, but then you've got to start deciding what happens if it doesn't happen. That's the point. You get my point? And that's hard to see. It's hard to see, darling, because they're mixed together so completely. And also, talking about relationships, like my friends in prison, they don't have the luxury to change their situation. They're on death row, they've got 30-year sentences, they're doing everything they can to get out, but as always in all prisons, it's mostly the poor people. Working class, poor, no money, no anything. So and especially in America, it's so overcrowded. It's like you just get lost in this nightmarish system unless you have money or lawyers. It's like a nightmare. It's like hell, So they don't have the luxury to expect something to change. They just don't have that luxury. So then they're very amazing practitioners all the more because of that. Because they know they've only got one choice: change their mind. But we might as well be in prison, because there you are in your crummy relationship, let's say, and he's clearly not accepting, he's not even, okay, there's two things. He might be doing everything he can to agree to fulfill expectations, but if you're really strong attachment and never satisfied, that's the nightmare for him. No matter what he does, it's never enough for you. You always moan, always complain, always criticize, because that's the pain of attachment, when no matter what he does, no matter how much he loves you, we can see it in some relationships, you're never satisfied, and we go mad between each other. You can't see, and you don't realize it's your own mind that's the problem. And you always, this is one nightmare of attachment. So then the key thing is in a relationship, whether that's with your boss, your mother, your boyfriend, whatever it is, whatever relationship. The nightmare is this: when we're overwhelmed by the victim mind, and I'm trying to be mean about us, which means overwhelmed by your attachment and your neediness and your expectations and no awareness of your thoughts and feelings, in other words, a really suffering person, then all the expectations, fantasy ones, got dumped on that person into the whole concept of getting married, having a family, whatever it might be, or that job, it's totally perfect in the first day, and then after a month you can't bear the colleagues, you can't bear the boss, you're driving home, you're miserable, and then someone says, well, you know, you could leave the job. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. No, I won't get another job. No, not possible. No, I'll never get blah, 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 blah. Well, you know, you could change your mind about it. No, I can't do that. He is horrible. So you can't leave the job and you can't change your mind. You might as well be in prison. At least my friends in prison change their mind. You see my point? We are living in hell. So we don't even know how to change the job. We're too scared. Oh, I couldn't leave my husband. Or, oh, he really does love me. Punch, you know. I mean, do you realise that 40% of all female people on this planet who get murdered, you know who murders them? The bloke in the same bed. This is not against men, I promise. This is about attachment and ridiculous and unawareness of our own mind, unaccountability, pain and suffering, you know, being victims. We're all victims, you know. It's so broken-hearted. So the thing is, if you're in a relationship and you're starting to get disappointed, you've got to look first at your own expectations. Are they reasonable or not? And attachment, its main job is having false expectations and frantic, desperate expectations, believing that when he does it, I will then get happy. And you wonder why you're not getting happy, even though he's doing everything in his power to make you happy. Some people are like that. It's like this nightmare. So, once you've got to establish, is it me or is it he's really cheating on me? Is he really not doing his job? And that's a fine thing to work out. So then, if you do, the thing is, before you start to do any work, you've got to make a decision. Is this a valid, is this relationship, is there something in this relationship, is there something in this job that is worth me making an effort about? You've got to make that decision first. So if you do really decide you can't handle the job, that there's nothing worthwhile there for you, leave it. Have courage and leave it. Take control of your life and leave it. But if you do decide there's just no way I can afford not to have a job right now, then you change your mind. And like that woman on death row, she saw the good things about it. The consequence of that is you'll start to be happy. That's the part that's so shocking. We don't realise that. We don't realise if we try to see the good things in the job. If you're not going to leave it, you've got no choice. But what we do is we just keep being miserable as well, because we don't realise we can change our mind. So we've got to be accountable, either way, accountable. And that's the part that's really hard, you know.
Thank you.
Are we communicating, people? Yeah. Who was? Yes.
Just going on from that, when you say changing your mind, are you talking about acceptance, or are you talking about reinterpretation?
It's a very loaded word, because we hear it as passivity, you know. This is one of the interesting point with this woman on death row. You could say she totally accepted this nightmare, but she didn't sit there being passive. And that's what we think of as acceptance. Oh, well, I'm in prison, what the hell? No, that's the incredible irony. Because she accepted that she couldn't change this nightmare, she then changed her interpretation of it and made the most of it, thus became a more marvellous, accountable, happy, content person, and continued to work on her freedom. But the other guy, he couldn't lift a finger to get freedom, because he was out of his brain with rage. So so you're the beneficiary. She shouldn't just sit there happy and passive. Oh, well, I'm in prison. She never stopped working on her freedom, but with a happy mind, with intelligence. So then she got out. So it's not passivity.
But is it a reinterpretation?
Closer.
Is it a reinterpretation of that as an injustice? So,
what do you mean by that?
So are you saying that she reinterpreted?
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. It was clearly unjust. She didn't say it was unjust. She didn't say, oh, this is really just. I should be in prison. I didn't tell you she said that. She said she had this grand way of putting it. She decided she'd see it as a cave. She decided she'd use it to her practice. Why is that denying the reality that it wasn't just? Of course it wasn't just. That's a lie. That's nonsense. Oh, my husband really is such a lovely husband. Beat, beat, beat. No, it's still wrong that he beats you. That's a fact. But if you can't change it, you see it differently. That's much more precise. It's a much more accurate way of saying it. She didn't say it was about just. It wasn't just. It was wrong. Do you see my point?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Okay, good. Someone else? Yes, over there. And here behind you. Over here then, go. Give the man the mic.
Thank you. I just had a very general question about your work on death row, which is obviously really interesting. Yes. I'm just wondering, when you meet these people, how do you decide whether you...
I go looking for people on death row.
or when you speak to them, how do you decide whether you believe them or not? Because that must be...
what do you mean believe them? What's it got to do with the price of fish?
Well, whether you when they say that they're not guilty.
I'm not going to see about whether they're guilty or not. I couldn't care less if they're guilty. What are you talking about?
But you're talking about the stories that, you know, the woman, you know, it was
I read her memoir.
Okay. So it's okay. I was under the impression you were working with the people on death row.
I do.
Right. Okay.
But your question is blowing my mind. So you have to stop, and I will give you my view of it, and then you can try and hear what I'm saying. Because what you're asking me is just the wackiest thing.
Okay. No, you go for it then.
That's what she said. I'm very direct, you see. It's called Australian rudeness. Now let me explain. That's a very good point. Thank you very much. Okay. I was based in California in the 90s, and I got a letter when I was editing our magazine. I got a letter from a young man in prison in California. He told me he'd been in prison in gangs in Los Angeles since he's 11. He was Latino. He'd been in prison since he was 12, and then tried as an adult when he was 16 for 3 attempted murders, just gang fights. The sentencing is kind of heavy, so he got 3 life sentences. At the time he wrote to me, he'd read this book by Lama Yeshe and it had our address on it, so he wrote. And he said he was very moved by the talk of compassion. So he wanted to know more about Buddhism. So it started from there. So I sent him books. Then he kept writing, and then another friend wrote, and within a year I had 40 people writing, sending books. So the whole system was people in prison read a Buddhist book, they liked what they read, they wrote to us, and we send them more Buddhist books and become their friends if they continue to practice. That's it. That's all. So one friend in Kentucky, you know, read a Buddhist book, and I went to give a talk, and the guys on death row were invited to come to the talk, so they came to the talk. So there's a fellow there called Mitch, and he'd already become a Buddhist, and so I've known him for 25, 26 years or something, so he's a Buddhist, and I work with his practice. Nothing to do with guilty. Guilt, not guilt, who cares? That's his business. Sure. I work with people who want to work on their minds, and you don't, as a Buddhist, you never dare shove it down their throats. One time ever, I gave a talk in a prison in Melbourne where I realised as soon as I walked in, they had been told to come to the talk. I talked about the football and left early. They didn't want to hear about Buddhism. You've got to want it from your side. So the whole prison project was coming from people who wrote to us, who wanted to learn about Buddhism. And the ones who sustain their practice, obviously the ones who continue. I mean, the wackos don't write to us, the psychos don't write to us. You see my point?
Sure.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even talk about what they do normally. Okay, the guys on death row I know, because you usually get there because you murdered somebody, you know. But I very rarely talk about what people do unless they want to talk to me about it. Sure. I'm interested in people who want to work with their mind. And that you can't fake. This is a very interesting point. You can fake having faith, I think. You can fake loving God or something, or loving Buddha, but you can't fake recognizing your anger. I mean, working on your mind means you recognize you have anger, you recognize you've harmed people, you recognize your attachment, you recognize your neuroses. That's very hard to do. You can't pretend to do that. It's a deeply personal thing to do. And that's the essence of the Buddhist approach. Do you understand my point?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Someone else? Yes, darling.
Hi. So my question is about, let's say, you know that the mind causes suffering, you want to change the mind. At that point, you will probably encounter some resistance from the mind, right?
I can't hear you.
So I guess my question is, once you try and start changing the mind, how do you deal with the initial resistance that comes from it? Because obviously, it's not going to want to be changed.
I mean, that's like saying, when you start to play tennis, how do you deal with the pain and the problems and the missed hits? It's just part of the learning, isn't it? I mean, practicing something is incredibly painful because it attacks the status quo. You do one push-up, it attacks the status quo. So practice is going beyond that and continuing to practice, continuing to make mistakes and learn from your experience. So it's intense and it's very hard because you're dealing with your own junk, you know. A friend of mine who's a therapist, is a Buddhist as well, she said it's like having your hands in your own shit. Anybody doing any kind of internal work, any therapy, you go to a person and talk about your feelings, it's really painful. And anybody doing any kind of work on the mind, we know there's some level of accountability there and to try to take responsibility and, you know. So it's extremely painful because it's the opposite to ego. Ego wants to feel innocent and blame, and the pain of that is unbearable. So it's a painful job. But like any job, Tibetans have a nice way of putting practice makes perfect. They say nothing gets more difficult with practice. It's a nice way to put it, I think. It's a more humble way of putting it. Nothing gets more difficult with practice. So it's up to, and the point, like anything, when you know the benefits of doing something, you'll keep doing it. So, you know, initially, you don't see any benefit going to the gym. You get all excited to go to the gym. You see all these lovely, toned people. Oh, wow, I'd love to look like that. And you come home from the gym the first day. You can't believe the pain. You've discovered muscles you didn't know you had. But if you give up then, you're in trouble. But you've got to know it's a good pain. If you're feeling that pain just watching television, you're in trouble. But as soon as you're exercising your mind or your body, you're hitting up against the status quo. You're hitting up against your comfort zone, and that's intense. So that's part of the process, baby. And you've got to know you've got to have the long-term, you've got to know the benefit of going to the gym. You've got to know the benefit of dealing with your own shit and your own anger, your own pain, your own hurt, and giving up blame and becoming accountable. It's extremely painful work. So when you know the benefit, you'll keep going. Do you understand? Okay. What else, people? Something else? Nothing? No points? No questions? No arguments? No debates?
I've got one.
Oh, what's that, Cam?
The Buddha's assertion that negative states of mind are adventitious and the positive ones are in the nature
At the core of our being, yeah.
Why? Why does he assert
Very
that?
logical answer. And that's the only way we can hear the logic, thank you, the only way we can hear the logic according to this model, you know, is to recognize this point I made before, that all these emotions we have, which is what we're so mainly involved with, the pain of the emotion, the tears, the aching, the agony, you know, which is the grosser level of these states of mind. Once we've done the work of getting some focus and understanding this model and doing the practice of noticing the thought beneath the emotions, getting down to hear the elaborate conceptual stories. So the Buddhist model of the mind is very distinct. We have sensory consciousness, which is, already this is very interesting, already this is very fascinating. We have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. So sensory, as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. We judge everything by our sensory experiences, right? It's huge for us. So, you know, but it's a really powerful analysis when you study the epistemological model of the mind, which is astonishingly fascinating. Materialist scientists will be blissed out to study it, but they've got to first posit the possibility that they're studying the non-physical part of the mind, not the brain itself. So, okay, very simple example. And this is a very telling point about the way the mind works. I might say to you, I won't, but I might. I wouldn't, but I will tonight. What a pretty cup. It's not so pretty for my eyes, whatever. But the point is this, very clear. I will say what a pretty cup, and you'll see me pick up a thing, look here, and out my mouth comes some words. So now we just assume, don't we, without question, that my eyes see a pretty cup. Rubbish, Buddha says. The sensory consciousnesses, and they talk about them in this way, which is to really spell it out, is that part of my mind, which in the Buddhist view is not physical, that functions through the medium of the eyeball, the nerves, the drum, the bits and pieces, all the bits and pieces, the physical bits working nicely. Technically for the Buddha it's very crucial. Eyeball doesn't see anything. It facilitates the mind to function and the part of the mind that functions specifically through the eyeball in that business. So we have the 5 sensory consciousnesses. And each of those sensory consciousnesses has its own specific object that it cognizes. So they're like really limited. They're profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. So eye consciousness can only cognize 2 things. Shape and colour. That's it. So if that's true, then very obviously the first question is, well, what part of my mind is cognizing a pretty cup? And so what happens is this. That's your mental consciousness. As Lama Zopa says, that's where the workshop is. And for the Buddha, that's where these billions of thoughts and opinions and feelings and emotions, and the more stormy ones and the more subtle ones, are all there running continuously, 1,000 thoughts a second, underneath, that we pay no attention to until they vomit out the mouth. So they are all conceptual stories. So what happens is this. The millisecond, because I'm a bit speedy and I make, have opinions even if I'm wrong. People say, are you sure? I'll say, if I'm wrong, I'm sure, you know. Whatever, I'm joking. But my eyes, I'll look here, and then in a millisecond what will happen, this is really true, and you'll laugh, but it's true, quicker than Google, and it's really true, the way the mind works cognitively in the epistemological model of the mind is incredible, so fascinating. Quicker than Google, my memory is accessed. Now, Buddha's view is there's not a single thing we've ever seen, tasted, touched, heard, smelt, thought about ever that's gone astray. Everything is stored. I mean, Geshe Tashi here one time said it's like you're shooting a movie all day. Everything is stored in our consciousness. So whatever I've retained in there, the bit that I can recall, in a millisecond, quicker than Google, up comes my opinions. So everything that comes out of our mouth, whether it's screaming like a maniac or saying quietly, it's a thought. It's a sound, and it's an articulate sound, and it's the expression of a thought. Well, a thought is a concept. So whether I'm standing there raging at you, you are evil, you're the cause of all my suffering, I'm going to kill you and rip you to pieces, or whether you're like my friend on death row, Mitch, who's a Buddhist, and he said, one of these guys whom I know, he said, Robina, he thinks of torture all the time. So if he wrote down every thought he had, it'd be pretty monstrous. They're all thoughts. Everything is conceptual stories, but to the subtlest degree of conceptuality. And they're programmed in our mind. And then the stuff that we're familiar with, like my anger since a little girl, was hugely emotional. Because guess why? Because I'd practiced those angry thoughts to the point where now my body was involved as well, and it was totally instinctive. In just the same way, if I see you play the piano and you're brilliant at it, I will know that you've practiced for 10, 20 years. But in the beginning, you stumbled over C, D, F, right? But you perfected it eventually, so it became instinctive, didn't it? And totally emotional. Look at your body's involved. You're spacing it, you're laughing, cracking a joke, smoking a cigarette and playing the piano simultaneously. Because it's now habit. Well, that's what the Buddha's point. The stuff that's emotional is just habit. And we've got the concepts down, and they're just now totally emotional. And we've forgotten, we can't see the concepts. So we've got to go backwards and down, dig deep, not into the past, but dig deep down, drill down with ever more concentration. And we're going to hear these elaborate, maniac, conceptual, demented scripts that we are believing in as truth. That's when you can now see, and this is now the point, you begin to distinguish the lies from the truths. And we're not talking religious truth, we're talking reality truth. A valid cognition in Buddhism at a conceptual level, is a thought that's in sync with its object. So if I say, that is a cup, we've all agreed in our culture that that's called a cup, you know. If you think it's a toilet, you're going to be in trouble. It will function as a toilet, but we're going to be in trouble. So we've agreed this is a cup. Well then, that's a concept, that's a thought. It is a cup, you know. So, I went off track there. What happened? I suddenly went off track. I lost my own plot.
Adventitious.
Okay, a valid cognition is one that is a thought that has a valid object. So here, tick the box, it's a cup. Good enough. We've made it up anyway. We've agreed it's a cup, okay. Now, pretty cup, now we start getting nervous. No, Robina, that's an ugly cup. Don't be ridiculous, I'm going to have a war, you know. It's still an opinion. So, no, even a more simple, better example. Forget it. A simple, yeah. Let's say I think it's a toilet. So I forget it's a cup. I'm learning words. I just forget. I'm learning English and I forget the word. You get my point? And I thought, oh, that is a toilet. No, don't be silly, Robina, it's a cup. Oh, I forgot, it's a cup, right? Okay, now, the point is this. It is a toilet is a concept, do you agree? And it is a cup is a concept. They're both equal in being concepts, aren't they? Well, so it is a toilet is a misconception. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. And it is a cup is a valid conception within the conventional reality of our world. Okay, so when you, and I just forgot, I got the wrong word, and you say Robina's a cup, and I go, you're absolutely right, of course it's a cup. Now, what happened to the previous concept that I had a moment ago when I said it is a toilet? It was in my mind, wasn't it? So now what has happened to that concept? What's happened to it?
It's changed. What
happened? More dramatic, please. What has happened to it? No, that's not enough to say. What has happened to that thought?
The previous one.
It is a toilet. What happened to the thought? Where is that thought now?
It's in the past.
No, it doesn't exist. Where is it now? Okay, I'm going to push it. I had a thought 1 minute ago, it is a toilet. It was a real thought in my mind. It was a thought, right? Then you fixed me, you corrected me, and then I agreed with you, it is a cup. So now today, this second, this minute later, I'm saying it's a cup. So that was a moment ago, but what has happened to that thought? Is it still in my mind?
No.
What happened to it?
It's gone.
Thank you! And this is the point, what made it go?
The new experience.
Just keep it more simple, what made it go? The truth! That's how you get enlightened. So the Buddha's saying our minds are riddled with lies right now that are eons old, that are based on massive emotion, that have even caused us to be humans and animals and God knows what. It's like eons he's talking about. All of these are elaborate constructs that we have made up that have no basis in reality. No wonder we suffer. We're maniacs. So the job is, as you get more subtle in your mind, and you start to hear the lies, and then you argue with them with valid concepts until eventually you eliminate the lot. Can you hear my point?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So of course this is based on this model. This is this view. You've got to buy into this view, you know. You've got to buy into this system to hear this, you know. That's how you get enlightened. It's not complicated, it just takes a while. Because the lies are very deep. Yes.
Hi, Robina.
Hello there.
How are you?
Good, I'm very well.
I don't really know what my question is.
Well, give it a go, okay?
Feeling something, which is about...
Oh, God, feelings.
I know, I can't help it.
Give it a go. Just say it.
It's about being a social human being and connection to other people.
Okay, good. We are social beings.
So my thing is that I live alone and I go through all sorts of attachment and weird feelings and pain and all that stuff.
About being alone, you mean?
No, just about, well...
You're a normal person, in other
I'm just
words.
a normal person.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I'm like, well, I can... So I overthink lots of things, and I, you know, in my life, I've mostly lived on my own, and... yeah, I'm just aware of lots of things. Anyway, what I'm saying is that sometimes it just feels good to sit next to another human being. And so I hear that message, which is like, actually, we're social beings, and just being next to another person, even coming here tonight, I feel a calmness in my spirit.
Okay, I understand.
I'm trying to just understand, because I'm aware that it is... it just kept coming to me when I was listening to you, and I couldn't think what the question was. But there is something which isn't about attachment, but it's just about that physical sense of being this human being.
Okay, I understand.
And the calmness that just comes from maybe hearing from someone or being with another person.
I understand. So it's a mind. May I suggest it's a minefield?
It is.
It is. So let's just do some analysis, kind of brutal analysis, shall we?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you so much. If we take this analysis of the neurotic states of mind, if you're fully driven, if they are really running the show. So if you, in our world, if you think of a person whom we call, like, we'd call them a psychopath or something, like, who's really, using the Buddhist analysis, they'd be super ego-grasping, profound sense of their own separate self, super powerful, maniac attachment to get exactly what they want, unbelievable rage and violence and manipulation to get what they want, and then lots of duplicity and lying and manipulating and harming and all the other inappropriate ethical behaviour based on their poor crazy mind.
Yes.
I mean, if you use that analysis, that's a crazy person. I mean, just being very rough.
Yes.
Okay. That person would not be able... Buddha says we've got the neurotic states of mind in here, and we've got the virtues. So it's all a question of which ones prevail at any given moment. In general, if you keep practicing, and at any given moment. So at one moment with a boyfriend, you can be raging with attachment, out of your brain, demented, despair, blaming, hurt, broken-hearted. I mean, it's what causes us pain.
Yes.
And the belief that he's horrible. And then the next minute, you've forgiven him, and you're all full of lovey-dovey, and you're full of love and compassion, and it's marvellous to be sitting next to him, and it's the virtues predominating. So that's not, but it's never that simple. We have a mixture of them. Yeah. Okay. So we are social beings. Now, I think in our world, psychology, as you said, our modern psychology, we define ourselves as social beings, and I think we even consider that to become a reasonable person, you need to be socialized. So this is why I think one point, perhaps, if you hear about a Buddhist who goes off for 1 year to do retreat, we don't quite know what to do with that.
Yes.
Because what the name of Jesus, God, are they doing in their mind for 1 whole year on their own? I mean, they've got to be pretty autistic.
Yes.
I mean, it's just that we don't know what to do with it. And even if you think it's being mindful, a whole year of mindful, give us a break, you know. We don't know what's going on because we don't have that analysis of the subtlety of what's going on in our mind that we need to delve into deeply and profoundly. That is the work that you do that turns you into this marvelous, joyful, radiant, blissful, fulfilled, compassionate person.
Yes.
And then when you're like that, that's when you're really developed. You can be on your own for 40 years, you'll be happy, and you'll be with others for 27 years and you'll be happy. Either way, because you're in charge of things.
It doesn't matter.
So if we're attached mostly, but it's never mostly, darling. It's clear, you know, we've got lots of good qualities and kindness. So what you're describing, even though you're living on your own, done everything on your own, blah, 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 there could be a tinge of attachment. That's for you to look into.
There definitely
the sense that I'm not valid because I've got, I mean, so the need, when we have this, as soon as it's an emotional neediness, you know, so if you haven't got a boyfriend, I mean, just being gross now, and you ring up your girlfriend, oh, I'd love to go out for dinner with you tonight, and you go out for dinner, but if somebody's got a boyfriend, you'll drop it like a hot cake, you know, because, do you understand? So because of this attachment, the sense, and this way, if you articulate attachment as a sad, suffering thing, it's a sense that I'm nothing on my own. And then genuine, I mean, people have incredible loneliness. It's a real thing. But if you take the source of it, it's because of attachment. And because that person has never looked into their mind, like the old lady or the old man whose wife is dead, kids have left them, nobody sees them anymore. They don't even know how to process what they're thinking and feeling. So, of course, all their props have disappeared. They're going to be profoundly lonely because they don't know how to see their own mind.
Yes.
But once you start that job,
yes,
it brings incredible satisfaction, incredible fulfillment. And then when you are with others, it can also be totally joyful. Of course it will be. Of course it will be. So we have to learn to know which part of your mind at any given moment is running the show, basically.
Yeah,
You see my point?
I definitely
and it's quite
see
subtle.
it. I mean, it's my life kind of story. I understand it. I get it completely.
Wonderful.
And I can see, you know, the last 2 weeks for me, I've been in total attached. Like, just listening to you, I'm like, that is where I've been.
I understand.
And then I can see absolutely when I'm not in that place.
That's right, exactly.
And the reality, nothing in front of me has changed.
There you are.
So I get it.
Good.
I do get it.
Well done, girl. That's
it's
it.
just about practicing.
That's all. And it's just practicing. But it really gets quite subtle. But the crucial point here, the Buddhist view, which I'm saying there, is that we have to identify in this model the characteristics when it's an unhappy state of mind. And the characteristics of a valid, which sounds peculiar, because they're as different as chalk from cheese, but they're all mixed, they're merged together, you know.
Yeah.
So often the thing is, like in my relationship, it could look like we're just being totally gorgeous and in love and in heaven and everything's perfect. Well, that mainly is because he's doing everything my attachment wants.
Yeah.
And as long as, and it's not being mean, if he's loving me and kind and smiles at me and does everything perfectly and puts the toilet seat down and doesn't chew his food loud and does everything my attachment wants, of course I'll think I'm happy because my attachment is getting what it wants. So the sign, the indicator of when it's more attachment than love is when he doesn't do what my attachment wants. If I start to get annoyed, there's the sign. But if I don't get annoyed, I think, oh, that's just a darling, let him fart again. It's all right. That means I've got more love than attachment.
Yeah.
So that's the sign, you know.
And then we've
in other
also,
words, if you're looking forward to a summer gathering of people and then it's cancelled, check how you feel. And if it's got, oh, I'm so sad, that's because of attachment. And it's normal human being. Excuse me, we're just ordinary people. We've all got it. So there's going to be this kind of laser-like observance of the mind and distinguishing the difference in all the little voices in there, you know.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
And being so kind to ourselves and so patient. You know?
I mean, I had an exchange with my dad last night because I must have been reaching out to him going, oh, Dad, you know, I'm feeling whatever I was feeling. And he sent me this hilarious text back about his relationship with his wife and how he'd said the wrong thing and then it created this whole drama for the whole day. And he was like, Rachel, it's much better to be on your own.
Oh, there you go. So that's also the grass is greener, isn't it?
But it's just, I mean, I think what the mind can do, and I certainly know with my mind, it can just go, when it's in that kind of phase, it just goes on and on.
Right. And
it'll just go, it's this, it's that, it's
and
this.
that's where we have to have some control.
And it's,
and analysis and control. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Thank you, Robina.
Good.
Thank you.
It's time to go home, I thought. It's 10 to 9, isn't it? Time to finish? Is that the plan? We're going to be thrown out by the police or something? Or what? Any more questions, you people, before we finish? Yes, darling.
So I have a question about love and attachment.
Yes.
It's a bit weird, but it's been bugging me for a long time. My dad has
deep... Bit closer to the mic.
Sorry. My dad has deep depression and he's alcoholic.
Oh, sweetheart.
But he's the kindest man you ever meet.
Darling. Yes.
And the other day, I lost my shit and shouted at him.
What?
Yeah,
you got mad at him?
I shouted at him.
Oh, darling.
Because I want to help him.
Of course you do.
I'm really close to him.
Yes.
But I don't know what's the limit. I'm trying to analyze my thoughts.
Yes.
Is it attachment? Or I really want him to see the best of him?
I tell you, we've only got a few minutes, but I'll see if I can say it quickly. This is the nightmare. This is the minefield. And this is the key to success when we understand it. When we understand this attachment in us, so it's inevitable. You do love your father, which means you want him to be happy, you empathize, you can see his pain, and you want him to be happy. But what we don't see until we start working on our minds quite deeply, that love you have and that compassion is informed and polluted and dragged down by your own frantic attachment that can only bear the nice things. Attachment is a junkie that can only bear the nice things. That, if you hear that, which sounds brutal, then that naturally pollutes the way you see your father. So the thing is, then that causes us to not have enough wisdom to know whether what we say or do will even help him. So real compassion is empathy for someone suffering, but then you've got if you haven't got that much attachment, and we have to attempt to practice not following your neediness and attachment, then that will make your mind more clear, and then you'll have the wisdom to know what to say when. And often you know there is nothing to do but love him. But attachment wants to change people, and that's for our sake. And it's hard to see the difference between whether it's for his sake and our sake. And we get frantic when it's for ours, because attachment just can't bear seeing unhappy things. If you understand that is why our mummies get involved in us and stick their noses where they don't belong. That's why we get possessive with each other. That's why we step over the boundaries, because we don't distinguish between genuine compassion that's truly for his benefit, which is hard to have, and the compassion that's polluted by our own needs. Do you understand? Do you understand?
I do.
It's really hard, darling.
It is very hard.
So you just sometimes just love him for who he is. I mean, I always use an example. I'll say it now to finish. I have a friend in Australia who's a Buddhist. She's like a grandmother now and got a husband, and the husband's an alcoholic. And so at some point, when you realise your husband's an alcoholic, no one wants an alcoholic husband. You just don't want that, so that's reasonable. So I'm speaking simply, but she eventually at some point decided, and probably by that point she's got grandchildren, she had to make some decisions. So in other words, attachment always wants to hope the other person will change. It's also love and compassion there, but we've got to see the difference. But at some point she realised she wasn't going to change him. Or she realised, and this is the real the acceptance business, she was going to stop expecting him to be different, to manipulate him to be different, to see him as, and that's a powerful state of mind. So she had to weigh up her options. Was it worthwhile to stay, or was it worthwhile to go? Because they're the two options, right? You understand? So she weighed it up. Well, the kids love him, he's kind, he doesn't vomit in the soup, he's generous, he's a quiet drunk. Do you understand my point? He's retired at 4 p.m, he goes outside with his dog, sits under the tree, drinks his 4 bottles of beer or 6 bottles of beer, comes in, has his dinner at 7 o'clock with his 6 bottles of red, and goes to sleep. But she made a decision that it was worth it. He's kind, he's generous, the kids love him, the grandchildren love him, and so she stopped being attached, stop manipulating him, stop expecting him, stop getting angry with him, stop thinking about it. She now sees his good qualities and accepts him for who he is. She goes on a retreat, she does this, she does that, she's kind, she's loving. That's the point. And he might or might not change. You still do everything you can, but stop the attachment, the unhappy part, the annoyed, irritated, thinking about it, frustrated. If I do this, and then talk about it behind his back, and if only this, and therefore that. That's the stuff that makes us crazy. And we build it up in the family, and then we get upset and angry because he upsets mum and dad, and all the dramas. It's hard to be this way, but it's just practical. In the end, this is a practical thing.
I think it's because there's attachment to reputation as well. My other brothers expect me to help my father.
Why should they?
So when they seem not to care, or they think I'm nihilist.
And this is where attachment goes out and out and out. So you've got to have a lot of courage to do that. You've got to have a lot of courage. And this is attachment, how we're seen. Of course, it's massive. Yeah, that's right. It's not easy.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, that'll do. So, doing prayer again. Just another little one to end, like bookends for the day, So this one, we call it a dedication. It's a bit saying, here we've been, hour and a half, or 2 hours, whatever it was, I forget. As many moments as there have been, really, the Buddhist view, nothing's gone astray. It's all gone into our memory. We don't remember it, but it's all there, stored to access again, marvellous. So when all these seeds we planted, may we nourish these seeds with our effort from this moment forward, however we work on ourselves, whatever we do to help ourselves and help others. May we use these seeds and nourish them to grow our amazing potential, to never give up on our potential, and on being able to benefit others. One step at a time, never give up. And may compassion, another little prayer, may compassion grow and grow in the universe, right? Kewadinyu dudag lama sangye drubgyurne drowa chikyang malupar Dei sala kapashok Jangchob semchog rinpoche, ma ke panam ke gyochig, ke panyampa me payang, gong ne gong du habashog. Okay. I have 4 advertisements. All about me. There's 2 postcards out there, just on a table where Moya's got all her jewellery and things, delicious things to buy, and other things. There's 2 postcards. One's me with an elephant, and that's advertising the pilgrimage we've been doing since 2001 to raise money for our prison project, $500 per person. And it's an amazing experience. Go to all these places of the Buddha in India and Nepal. It's marvellous. So that raises money for our prison project. That's the next one is in February coming. And the other one is a trek up to Lama Zopa Rinpoche's cave up in the mountains, 4,500 metres up above Namche Bazaar. We walk slowly up, walk up for 4 days, starting Kathmandu, and then spend a 6-day retreat up there. It's very amazing, up in the mountains. And that raises money for the Rinpoche's place up there. And then there's a CD and a DVD, and they're both me. What can I say? and they raise money for my Bodhicitta Trust, which helps different projects and prisoners and things. The movie, she mentioned it, my nephew made years ago, Chasing Buddha. And a lot of it's my friends in Kentucky in the prison there. And the CDs are choir of Robinas. It's kind of Tibetan tunes, but they don't have parts. So a friend of mine in Australia is a musician. She wrote parts, and there's multiple voices and a cappella. It's me singing a big choir of Tibetan prayers. And that raises money as well. That's all. My 4 advertisements.